Welcome to A Voice of Reason in Turbulent Times with Pastor Charles Burnett-Morrow. A powerful, practical, prophetic, and progressive commentary about what is happening in our world today.
Well, good afternoon, one and all. This is Pastor Charles here in North Alabama, representing Forward Christian Life Center, a new work in Nashville, Tennessee. Good afternoon. I don't expect that I'm going to go too long today. Of course, I frequently say that, and then I proceed to go much longer than I had anticipated, but we'll see how today works out. Okay. Um, we've got a couple of things to talk about. Donald Trump did his first State of the Union debacle this week. I did not waste 5 seconds of my time watching it. I have learned after Trump 1.0 that I am better able to maintain my sanity and to live without losing my mind if I ignore that demonic, habitual, perpetual liar. I can't stand, folks. I'm not even joking. I cannot stomach to hear that man's voice. I cannot stomach to listen to that man. I learned an awful long time ago that he is full of garbage and a liar, and he gaslights and constantly, I grew up with that and I have no interest in it whatsoever. So, personally, I don't waste 3 minutes of my time listening to him when he comes on television, on the news, or on a reel I'm watching on YouTube. I promptly change the channel or change the video or at least hit mute because seriously, I'm not joking. Um, that lying spirit that motivates him to speak, um, that spirit just emanates from him. And I am so uncomfortable with it that I just prefer not to be bothered. But anyway, having said that, during his, if you want to call it speech, I call it rambling. Um, Honestly, it kills me. I've never seen a man in my life who is a poor public speaker. Every time he gives a speech, it amazes me. He sounds like he is so disinterested and so emotionally uninvested in every word that he speaks. Every word. He just sits there and reads it off like, and we have a plan to do blah, 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 blah. And he looks like he's slumping and he's all, this man does not carry himself by any stretch of the imagination as a leader. He certainly does not carry himself like he's any kind of a strong, uh, you know, um, able bodied man. Every time you look at him at the meetings at the White House, he's slumped over. When you look at him sitting there with uh, Zelensky, he's slumped over. He's the guy, he always has that, what I would refer to as a lazy posture, just slumped over, just kind of hanging there, And it is amazing to me how people act like uh, this man is the least bit interesting to listen to. Be honest with you, um, I left the Republican Party. Uh, Honestly, I left the Republican Party because of George W. Bush. George W. Bush was one of the least intelligent, one of the most fumbling goofball men I've ever seen in my life. And I could not stand to watch him make speeches because, in my mind, um, every time he gave a speech, he was an embarrassment to our nation. And then along came Donald Trump, and I said, well, what do you know? The GOP has really beaten itself, and they've produced someone else who's actually even worse than George W. Bush. But anyway, during his speech, we saw Representative Al Green of Texas. I'll share this little article with you here. Al Green of Texas interrupted Trump's speech, calling out and challenging his lies and misrepresentations. I'm not sure how I feel exactly about people conducting themselves exactly in this fashion. But nonetheless, I do understand how someone could become so disgusted and so frustrated with the lies and the gaslighting and the misrepresentations that they might want to express their frustration. Now, I'm going to share a video with you. It's not very long. And this is the Al Green situation that we've been hearing about in the news.
Small business optimism saw its single largest one-month gain ever recorded, a 41-point jump.
Members are directed to uphold and maintain decorum in the House and to cease any further disruptions. That's your warning. Members are engaging in willful and continuing breach of decorum, and the chair is prepared to direct the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order to the joint session. Mr. Green, take your seat. Take your seat, sir. Take your seat. Finding that members continue to engage in willful and concerted disruption of proper decorum, the chair now directs the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order. Remove this gentleman from the chamber.
Don't you just have to love the strong man, the wonderful, strong, proud leader that the United States of America has these days, as he is being heckled and called out by a member of Congress. Trump stands there and stops his speech and turns around like a little boy who's been offended by somebody in kindergarten, and he looks at the teacher like, are you gonna do something about this? Folks, I'm telling you, I can't stomach the way this man carries himself. I cannot. It so amazes me that people are stupid and foolish enough to try to explain away the faults and failings of this miserable, weak, childish, infantile human being. Most presidents, when they make a speech of this nature, and presidents throughout history have conducted news conferences, they have done live appearances where, you know, a news person is approaching them as they go to the helicopter to head off to Air Force One, and they ask questions. You know, they shout out questions and stuff. And presidents have frequently had to contend with people crying out and heckling during speeches. It happens during campaign events. It happens, in any number of settings. And yet Donald Trump, wanting to be an authoritarian, what he wants is he wants the title of president to immediately entitle him to quote unquote authoritarian respect. He wants people to respect him like the people in North Korea respect their leader, and the way that the Russians respect Putin. Well, yeah, of course, because if anybody heckled either of them, they'd wind up dead, being thrown out a window or poisoned or something. But Mr. Trump just can't handle, oh my God, no, I cannot handle anyone even beginning to show any kind of disrespect when I'm speaking. And yet, interestingly enough, back in 2023, you might recall that Republicans repeatedly interrupted Biden during his State of the Union address. You see the article here online from CNN Politics. And let's just see if we can. All right, here we go.
Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. No, I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks,
what you didn't see here with President Biden was the childish, foolish, infantile pout and turning around to look at the vice president and the Speaker of the House as if to say, how can anybody do this to me? I'm the president. Nobody should try to heckle me or call me out for my lies and misrepresentations. Folks, please, dear God, open your eyes. Open your eyes and look at these kind of situations. Look at these circumstances. Donald Trump is the weakest, most childish. I don't even know how to describe the man. He literally sickens me. Literally sickens me to watch the way he reacts to every cotton picking thing, every little thing. He just has the most asinine and absurd reactions. As the Republicans were booing and heckling, and Marjorie Taylor Greene in that instance, mind you, that was just Biden's 2023 State of the Union address. So we're only talking about 2 years ago. So it was not long ago in history that the GOP was booing Biden and Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene was heckling him.
That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. No, I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond.
Notice how President Biden, with strength and resolve, continued making his comments. He ignored the heckles, he ignored the accusations, and just kept moving forward. That is how strength is demonstrated. That is how a true leader conducts himself and behaves when he is in such a setting as this and opposition is being voiced. I just don't even know what to say. I get so frustrated. Representative Al Green of Texas, his fellow House members voted to censure him, including, I might add, 10 Democrats. And the interesting thing about this is it demonstrates that even in a situation like this, there may be differences of opinion within the caucus. There may be differences of opinion on either side of the aisle. But Democrats have never been afraid, as a rule, to do what their conscience dictates. Honestly, it kind of wears me out sometimes that the Republican Party has defended and stood by some of the most vile, immoral, ungodly, wicked members of their own caucus, and yet the Democratic Party has so often stood up and said, no, this kind of conduct is not acceptable. We do not support folks behaving in this way. Al Franken had to leave the Senate because of accusations concerning improper touching and, being touchy-feely with the ladies and what have you. And he, ultimately did the right thing and resigned and left Congress. And frankly, in my humble opinion, I think he's been out long enough. He's done his penance, and I would not be opposed to him running once again for office there in the great state of Minnesota. But the Democrats have always conducted themselves differently than have the Republicans. And this is one of the things, folks, that I literally noticed years ago. There were several things that I noticed many years ago. Many years ago. I noticed how the Democrats were more likely to stand on principle than they were to stand by their man, so to speak, regardless of what their conduct, regardless of what they were accused of, or what they were being held to the fire concerning. I saw that Democrats tended to be more principled, knowing how our constitutional republic works. and understanding our system of government, I also noticed that the Democrats were rather gifted at approaching certain issues in certain ways. There were some issues, for instance, that they knew good and well they were not going to be able to tackle legislatively, in Congress. So therefore, they approached these issues rather through the courts. And many times, of course, they would wind up winning in the court. And so, I noticed over the years, I noticed that the Democrats just made good use of our system of government. They understood how it works. There are some issues that you can approach legislatively, but then there are some issues that ultimately, no matter how you slice it, they're going to wind up in the court system, and that is where the decision is going to be made. And while people, for instance, were decrying the fact that initially Obama was not pro gay marriage, many folks want to seem to forget that. But when he was first running for office, for president, he claimed at that time not to be in support of gay marriage. He only changed his stance, let's be honest, he only changed his stance when it became obvious that this matter was going to go to the Supreme Court, and it was highly likely that the Supreme Court was going to stand behind gay marriage. And all of a sudden, Obama had a change of heart and a change of opinion. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. It was political expedience, is what it was. And I'm not criticizing him per se for that. Political expedience, frankly, plays into many political stances. Many politicians will claim a certain position, and it's strictly out of political expedience. If they're going to get elected at all in order to be able to affect change and to do anything positive, then oftentimes they have to espouse, at least publicly, positions that they might otherwise have different feelings concerning. I've watched Republican candidates do it over the years. I've seen Republicans like John McCain and even George Bush Jr., oppose gay marriage and what have you, and other issues. I'm just using that as an example. And yet I had a real sense that when the rubber meets the road, they really could have cared less. It was not a big issue for them. It was not a big deal to them. They would be just as happy, they would not have been bothered were the matter made law, either in Congress or in preferably in the courts. And the one advantage to decisions being made in the court system is that the president cannot veto it. A lot of people forget. I remember when George W. Bush was in office, and we were all debating the gay marriage issue, and people were so upset that George W. Bush didn't support gay marriage and all this. And I kept saying on Facebook, I said over and over and over again, I kept telling people, I said, folks, it doesn't matter what George W. Bush's position on this issue is, because this is not an issue that will be addressed legislatively. Okay, it's not an issue that is going to be handled legislatively. this is an issue that ultimately is going to be decided in the Supreme Court. And people don't realize how the decision being handed down by the Supreme Court is actually better than it being produced legislatively. Because, as I say, even if the Democrats control both the House and the Senate and they're able to put together legislation and they pass it on to the president has veto power. He can veto it. When the Supreme Court comes down with a final decision, that decision is final, period. And so it is not a matter of the president being able to veto it. And I kept telling people, I said, listen, if you understand how our system of government works, then you will understand that this, as well as any number of other issues, will ultimately be decided in the courts. So let it play out, let it work its way through the system. It may take a little while, but if you think doing it legislatively is going to be quicker, you're out of your mind. You are flat out of your mind. The legislative process is not a quick process by any stretch of the imagination, especially when you have a chief executive who is likely to veto it anyway. So let it play out in the courts. But this week, once again, we saw the Fuhrer standing in a joint session of Congress before both the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, military high brass, and you saw him conducting himself like a slouch, like like somebody who can barely read, and someone who just cannot abide anyone heckling him or saying anything in opposition to the lies and the gaslighting that he loves to pour forth. If you remember how many times Trump during his campaign rallies would get flustered because someone began to yell out or began to heckle him. And when you look at the way that other candidates over the decades have conducted themselves during campaign rallies and State of the Union addresses, they stood there, they faced the audience. When someone heckled or someone booed, you didn't see them turning around and looking at the VP or looking at the Speaker of the House in hopes that maybe they'll do something. Well, what really makes me laugh is how House Speaker Dudley Do-Right, with his glasses, and his little Boy Scout haircut, how immediately, he acted to remove this person who's being disruptive, and you didn't see that when Biden was making his State of the Union speech. You didn't see that happening when Biden was speaking to Congress. And, that shows you, folks, that shows you the difference between true leadership and someone who understands that we live in a republic. We live in a representative democracy, and someone who has authoritarian aspirations. Those with authoritarian aspirations like Trump just get immediately flustered the minute anyone says or does anything that they perceive as being in opposition to that which they have said or are saying. All righty then. Let's move into yet another one of Trump's great, brilliant ideas. You see already that he has had to backtrack on some of his tariff notions. Um, this man so obviously knows nothing about anything. He does not understand politics. He does not understand political science. He does not understand governance. He does not care for 1 minute about the Constitution of the United States. He ignores it, does what he wants to do, and then gripes and complains when he is stifled by the courts. Well, the reality is, throughout the history of this country, presidents have at various times tried to do things by executive order. Some have done things by reason of legislation. Presidents have produced legislation. They've gotten members of the House to help them sponsor it. It's gone through the system. It's been approved by Congress. It's been approved by the Senate, winds up on his desk, and the president at that time signed it into law. However, that law was then challenged through the federal courts. It wound up in front of the Supreme Court after a number of appeals, and ultimately it was struck down in the Supreme Court. So it's not just a matter of executive orders can be struck down by the Supreme Court, but also legislation, things that have gone through the entire legislative process. Ultimately, whether it is a presidential order or whether it is an executive order or whether it is something done legislatively, ultimately it has to pass constitutional muster. Okay. And there are times when things do not do so. A lot of people, I've talked about this in the past, a lot of people do not realize that while Franklin Delano Roosevelt created a number of programs through the federal government in order to help provide jobs for Americans during the Great Depression so that people weren't losing their homes and losing their cars and going into bankruptcy. The reality is, listen carefully, two-thirds of the programs that Franklin Delano Roosevelt put forth were struck down in the Supreme Court. So he was only able to implement 1/3 of the ideas and the programs that he wanted to implement. The other 2/3 did not pass, according to the court's constitutional muster. Now, if that were Trump, my God have mercy, he'd be screaming and crying like a 2-year-old infant that the court system was rigged, that these were never Trumpers. These judges, if they're Republicans, are rhinos, they're Republican in name only. And by the way, rhino is synonymous with a Republican who is not MAGA. Okay. Any Republican who is genuinely a fiscal Republican, but who does not espouse the platform of the MAGA party, which I repeat is the new Nazi party. The Nazi party in Germany in the 1920s and early 30s was very small, very fringe. They were considered to be extreme, and most people did not espouse the ideas put forth by the Nazi party. It wasn't until the early 30s and after Hitler had attempted a coup that failed, and he wound up in jail for a couple of years, and upon exiting the jail, he decided maybe it's time to change our tact. Maybe we need to change our methods here. Instead of a military coup, instead of trying to take over government by force, what we need to do is follow the rules. During his time in prison, Mr. Hitler came to realize that, like any constitutional republic, any constitutional democracy, there are inherent weaknesses in the system. And if someone has a mind to do so, they can utilize the weaknesses within the system ultimately to completely dismantle the existing government. We are going through that right now. Donald Trump and Elon Musk are literally trying to dismantle our government so that they might establish an entirely new form of government. And they aren't quite as crafty as Hitler, because Hitler had enough sense to know I can stay within the law, I can follow the rules, and still accomplish my ends. Donald Trump and the new Nazi Party are not quite as patient as Hitler was, so they're trying to go in with Project 2025 and just take a wrecking ball to everything, hoping to be able to accomplish their ends more quickly. But the Nazi Party was small, it was fringe, it was considered extremist. But as the economy and the situation in Germany post World War I grew worse and worse, all of a sudden, many of the more extreme ideas of the Nazi Party came into favor with a great number of people in the German citizenry. Well, we have literally seen history repeat itself as the mega portion of the Republican Party. See, we've only got a two-party system. Germany had a number of parties. They were not limited to two parties. They had a number of parties. And the Nazi Party was a small party that, as I say, was kind of a fringe extremist party. And they only had a couple of people in government at the earliest stage, of the party. And what the new Nazi Party realized was they could not be successful creating a whole new party and trying to do what they were trying to do. But what they could do is they could work through the Republican Party and ultimately, like a cancer, they could infect and ultimately take over the Republican Party. And that is what we've seen happening in the last, 8, 9 years, 10 years. We've seen what began as a small fringe movement suddenly becoming the majority of the Republican Party. And folks, history is repeating itself. We are literally seeing history repeat itself. Many of the conditions of post-World War I Germany are shared by the United States today. People are upset. People are disgruntled. The economy is crushing a lot of folks today. And many of the conditions of pre-World War II Germany are being experienced in the United States today. And the United States, just like Germany, has fallen victim to the beguilement of a dictator wannabe and his many deceptions. Too many people in our country don't have a clue how our government works. They don't have a clue how our Constitution works. And therefore, for centuries, people have thought that a president, well, a president can just go in, he can go in there and do whatever he wants to do and get it done. And I don't understand. I keep jumping from Democrat to Republican. I vote Democrat this time and Republican next time. Then I vote Democrat the next time and Republican the next time, because they all promise to do these things. And none of these Americans are recognizing that many of the aspirations of a presidential candidate may be real. They may be very sincere in offering ideas and plans and thoughts. However, if you understand how our government works, then you understand that he or she is not going to be able to just walk into the Oval Office and start making changes. It just doesn't work that way. And so, you know, if Americans understood how our government worked, they would probably vote very differently than they vote. But when you have the false notion in your head that a president is a dictator and he can just walk in there and make any changes he wants to. And of course, Donald Trump believes that, and he has believed that from day one. And it has been his frustration, it has been the source of his angst and anger that this is not the case. Once he walked into the White House, all of a sudden he finds out that no, there is a Congress, there is a Senate that you must work with, there is a Supreme Court that you must convince that your actions and your efforts are constitutional. And if they are not in fact constitutional, then that Supreme Court has the power to strike down your program or your presidential executive order, whatever the case might be. And people who understand how our system of government works, instead of running around weeping and crying like the conservative population has done now for decades. Oh, this is this is the court system is bad. The court system is corrupted. We have these activist judges and blah, 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 blah. No, they're not activist judges, you foolish person. They are interpreting the Constitution the way that they understand the Constitution is to be interpreted. They're doing their job. As a matter of fact, I've said any number of times, Tommy and I have been together 24 years, and he can tell you how many times I've turned to him and I said, when a new Supreme Court justice was appointed, and we weren't really happy with the individual who was appointed. And I've told Tommy, I've told people for decades, I said, listen, you'd be surprised how many times someone is appointed to the Supreme Court, and whatever their ideals, whatever party they embrace, whatever political platform they embrace, once they're in that position of great power, all of a sudden the weight and the responsibility of that office comes down on their head, and they suddenly realize, wait a minute, it's one thing when I'm looking at things theoretically. It is something different when the decision that I make is going to affect our nation. It is going to affect the direction that we go in, and it has the capability of creating a slippery slope that could contribute to our nation falling into a very bad pattern and heading in a very bad direction. And then all of a sudden, these judges wind up making decisions that shock us all. The Chief Justice John Roberts of the Supreme Court, I remember when he was first um, installed, and folks weren't very happy. But there have been any number of times that the Chief Justice has sided with the more liberal judges, and he's taken a more progressive stance on certain issues. And I mean, it's been to the surprise of virtually everybody. People who remember that it was Ronald Reagan who nominated Sandra Day O'Connor for the Supreme Court, the first woman to sit on the Supreme Court. And of course, Ronald Reagan was, very, very much a conservative. And when she was appointed, people were terrified she was going to just, have this great ultra conservative effect on the Supreme Court. And yet, over the course of time, it is a well known fact that Sandra Day O'Connor's positions changed. She softened. Many of her more conservative ideals suddenly began to soften and change, and she began to lean to the left side of the aisle versus the right side of the aisle in many of the decisions that she made. So, I have great confidence in our court system. I have great confidence in the form of government that was established by our founding fathers. The only problem we have is there are inherent weaknesses, as I keep saying over and over again. If someone who is not operating from a place of goodwill, if someone who does not respect and appreciate the Constitution of the United States, if someone has a mind to dismantle our government and establish a new form of government, there are weaknesses within our Constitution that can be taken advantage of, can be utilized to accomplish this end. And this is what the MAGA crowd and Donald Trump have been waiting for. And I'm going to tell you a little secret. The MAGA party, the new Nazi party, they did not necessarily have a name for themselves, and they were not necessarily organized as a political party, but they existed long before Trump did. I was doing some research recently on Project 2025, and I was shocked to learn that the beginnings of Project 2025 reach back all the way to 1981. So that shows you, folks, how long this MAGA mentality and this MAGA party mindset has been in formation. Going back to 1981, we're talking about 40, almost 45 years, folks. That's an awful long time. And so that shows you how, just like in Germany after World War I, before World War II, how the Nazi party started out as this little seedling, and over the course of time, like a cancer, it grew and it ultimately infected the German government to such a degree that all they needed was the right leader. All they needed was the right chancellor to be able to implement all of their destruction and then the reconstruction of their government with a dictator at the head. And we are repeating. History is repeating itself. Moving on, I have said any number of times that Donald Trump is all about money. I've never seen a man in my life who dreams dollar signs. You know, he doesn't count sheep, he counts dollar signs jumping over the fence. You know, everything in his mind is about money, 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 money. It is all about greed. It is all about selfishness. I remember reading prior to his initial election, I read how that he would often crash charitable events. And, you know, this man talked about when you're a celebrity, you know, women allow you to grab them wherever you want to grab them and kiss them and do this and do that. And it's because you're a celebrity, you know, you have all this leeway and freedom to do these things. You know, celebrity gives you a certain license. Well, Donald Trump used to use his license as a celebrity to crash charitable events that he was not invited to. And the reason he was not invited to them is very simple. Wealthy people are always invited to charitable events. I know if I were running a charity, I'd want to send an invitation to all the richest of the rich in town. But Donald Trump was often excluded from invitations to charitable events. Why? Because he was not inclined to give. It was a well known fact that he was not a charitable giver. He did not donate to charities. And for this reason, he would not be invited to many black tie charitable events. And what he would do is he would utilize his celebrity to crash the event. He then would make certain that he jumped into pictures, you know, when the photographer from the New York Post showed up, or the photographer from the New York Times or the New York Daily News, when they were photographing various figures at these events, Donald Trump would make certain that he wound up in the picture. Why? Because it gave the impression that he financially supported these events. And yet, many, many, many of the people who sponsored these events and conducted these events and had Trump wind up showing up in pictures of the wealthy folks who showed up for these events, many of the folks that ran them came out and said, yeah, he crashed our event. He was not on the list. He was not invited. He crashed the event. He wound up in pictures. And did that motivate him to give in support of our cause? No, he never wrote a check. This man has known for decades how to create illusion, how to create an image, how to put forth an image that is entirely contradictory to what the reality is. I've talked in the past about the fact that when I was speaking to a former state overseer in the Church of God about advertising my first church when it was still basically in its fledgling stage, we didn't have a whole lot of people. But we were growing, you know, we were growing, we were doing okay. And but I was going to run an ad in the paper, and I told my overseer, I said, I'm going to run an ad that says small but growing, or you know, something to that. I was only 19 or 20 years old at the time, and my state overseer said, oh no, brother, you don't want to do that. He said, you know, the rule of thumb in advertising and in marketing is this: perception is more important than reality. It is more powerful than reality. He said, so when people advertise, they don't advertise, quote unquote, realistically, but rather they create perceptions. They want to create an image. They want people to believe, for instance, that if you smoke this particular cigarette, women are going to swoon all over you. Or if you drink this beer, all the party girls in their bikini tops and Daisy Duke shorts are going to crowd around you at the bar. They want to create these perceptions. And so he encouraged me to approach advertising in that fashion. Well, Donald Trump has been doing this for decades. Everything he does, everything. This ambush of Zelensky at the White House the other day, that was strictly a staged event meant to present to his base this notion that Trump is so strong and so, boy, he can be hard when he needs to be hard. He can be tough when he needs to be tough. And of course, there's nothing in the world better than chiding your daughter who has an abusive husband that beats the flames out of her and bringing her to your house and having yourself and your brother, your sister, her aunt, her uncle, her grandmother, her grandfather, whoever you wish to have with you in that meeting, and then beating her up and letting her know that she's not handling things right and she's not doing the things the way that she ought to. Instead of offering her assistance, trying to help her come out of that situation, just beating on her. After all, it's not enough she has an abusive husband. Well, it's not enough that Zelensky has been fighting for his life for 3 years. It's not enough that he's had to watch tens of thousands of his fellow Ukraine citizens die on the field of battle. It's not enough that he's had to hear the reports of Ukrainian women being raped by invading Russian soldiers. It is not enough that he has to contend with the reality that thousands of young Ukrainian children were captured and pulled back into Russia, pulled away from their families, kidnapped, taken to Russia so that they can be brainwashed and made to believe that Ukraine is part of Russia. It always has been, and it always will be. Well, I got news for you, my friend. Things change. If Ukraine was once part of the United Soviet Socialist Republic, but initially it was its own country, and it decides it wants to return to being an independent nation governed by a form of government of its own choosing, then those people have that right to make that determination. And so the notion that, well, it was part of Russia and so therefore, it always ought to be that way. Well, if that be true, then England can come along at any point in time and reclaim the United States and Canada, Jamaica and Hong Kong and any number of other countries that it colonized over the course of many centuries. But that is not the case. Here Zelensky is in the heat of battle, and we have a president in America who is standing with the opposition, not standing with our ally, standing with the opposition. Again, Trump is as ignorant and stupid a human being as any human being can be. He has no concept at all of how strategically important Ukraine is to the security of Europe. Ukraine is one roadblock, as it were, that helps to keep us off the path to World War III and nuclear annihilation. Ukraine holds a very unique and important position in the world order and maintaining world order and world peace. But Mr. Trump, he doesn't get none of this. He doesn't understand any of this. For a man who claims to be so bright and claims to have graduated at the top of his class from college, he is not the least bit willing to produce any school records to support his claims. I'm going to tell you right now, if I had such claims, if I were making such claims, and I had the paperwork to back it up, you better believe I'd produce it. Man, howdy, I'd produce it in a flat minute. If his IQ were so high, then baby, I'd go take me an IQ test and I'd sign off on letting the doctor reveal the test results to the public without my even having to see them first. If I had all these claims that Trump makes, and I had the documentation to back them up, of course you would release that documentation. Only a fool wouldn't. Trump doesn't, because perception is more important than reality. No, he's just lying and misleading in order to create this perception that he is so bright that he was at the top of his class. You know, he's not about to go down the reality road because he knows the reality road is going to show that he has an IQ of about 70. And so he's not about to go down the reality road. No. Stay on the perception path, just put forth an image. And, that ambush at the White House made me laugh because at one point, the VP was chiding President Zelensky and saying, how dare you come here and try to litigate, your case in front of the American people. And blah, 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 blah. Wait a minute, Mr. Vance. Was it Zelensky who scheduled this meeting? Was it Zelensky who invited cameras in for this meeting? Was it Zelensky who did this? Because last I understood, there isn't anything that happens at the Oval Office, there isn't anything that happens at the White House that must not be sponsored and created and scheduled by the president. So how is it that you're trying to suggest that basically he had an ulterior motive in coming before the cameras? No, that tells me you've just given yourself away. You have just revealed your true motivations yourself. You pulled that. You had the cameras there so that you could do exactly what you were trying to project onto President Zelensky. And I tell you, folks, if you listen close enough to what people say, and if you use a little bit of reason and a little bit of logic, it isn't very hard to put two and two together. Trump constantly projects. He constantly tries to suggest that the other side is doing what he, in fact, himself is doing. As Hitler's propaganda chief said, this is the technique that works. Try to suggest that the other side is doing what you, in fact, are doing, because then you've got all your people looking over here at these guys and they're believing that they're doing thus and so, and all the while you're over here on the other side doing everything you've accused them of doing. But by making the accusation and repeating it over and over again, you have everybody's attention over here and nobody's watching you. And this is a tactic that the GOP has been using for decades. All right, I want to close up today. I'm not going to be on but an hour and a half today, doing a 90-minute podcast. Donald Trump has come up with this brilliant idea of offering a gold card citizenship visa, a fast track to American citizenship. And we see here one article concerning this lovely plan of his. Then here USA Today has the headline, "What is a Trump gold card and who would qualify for special visa?" And then lastly, there is an AP release. Trump says he will offer gold cards for $5 million path to citizenship, replacing investor visas. Many nations offer what are referred to as investor visas. But once again, we see Donald Trump revealing his nature. Everything is about money. Everything is about money. American citizenship is for sale to the highest bidder. If you can cough up $5 million, bless God, we'll let the wealthiest oligarchs from other countries get on the fast track to American citizenship. It's not as though we don't have enough oligarchs in our country as it is. Donald Trump wants to bring them in from other nations as well. I've never seen anybody cheapen American ideals. I've never seen anyone cheapen American citizenship as Donald Trump has cheapened it. Folks, this ought to be offensive to our senses. This whole notion should be highly offensive to us. So many people have come to this country fleeing religious persecution, fleeing political unrest, fleeing economic hardship, and they have struggled and they have striven. They've gone through immense difficulties to reach our shore, and Donald Trump's not interested in them because they don't have all kinds of money. If you got all kinds of money, you're welcome to come. By all means, come. Don't listen to anything that you read on the plaque at the base of Lady Liberty. Send us your poor, your huddled masses longing to be free. No. Don't send us those. Send us your rich. Send us your filthy rich. Send us those that have all kinds of money. And the funny thing is, I love how Donald Trump tries to present the brilliance of this idea of his. He said, "Oh, these people will be coming and they'll be paying all kinds of taxes and they'll be creating businesses and jobs and blah, 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 blah." Wrong. Name one hyper wealthy American who has created businesses and then have proceeded to pay all kinds of taxes. No. These people coming in on a $5 million gold card, honey, those are the same people like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. Oh, yes, and Donald Trump, who are going to wind up paying nothing in taxes. So we're going to have people who are able to come and take advantage of the opportunities afforded them in the United States of America. But Are they actually going to contribute to our defense? Are they actually going to contribute to the betterment and the well-being of the American people? Are they going to support our education? No, of course not, because we're doing away with the Department of Education. So therefore, no, they're not going to be supporting that, because we're not going to have that. But are they going to be contributing large sums of money to help pay down our debt, reduce our deficit, balance our budget? No, they are not, Mr. Trump. And you are a liar and a fraud to even suggest that they would be. You know good and bloody well, as one who has bragged in presidential debates about your business prowess and how smart you've been to be able to avoid paying taxes. You know as well as anyone that these people are the very type of people who, in the end, pay nothing in taxes. But do you know who will carry the weight? You know who will carry the responsibility? You know who will be paying taxes in order to ensure our public defense and the defense of our borders? You know who? Oh, all those little guys that work in the businesses that these multi-billionaires and millionaires create, if indeed they create them at all. Of course, we forget about the fact that just because you're ultra wealthy does not mean that your business enterprise is going to be successful. If anyone should know this, you would think Donald Trump would know. After all, he has started dozens of business enterprises, from Trump Airline to Trump Steaks and Trump University and other Trump grifts. And they have failed. He wound up in bankruptcy, wound up closing up shop. So there is no guarantee that any one of these people who are able and willing to pay $5 million for a quote gold card, there's no guarantee that anything they might do would be successful and profitable from the start. So there are a lot of assumptions being made here. And I guarantee you, folks, the oligarchs in this country, Donald Trump being king of the oligarchs, they are wanting to reduce our debt. They are wanting to reduce our government expenses. They're wanting to, quote unquote, balance the budget, so to speak, for one reason and one reason only. Ask any dictator in history how they've done it, and they will tell you. This way, money that comes into the treasury will be able to find its way, interestingly enough, into the pockets of the leadership. That is how dictators work, folks. And of course, we also know there isn't a dictator on the planet, not a one, historically, who has ever conducted himself ethically and morally. No, they are corrupt. They are vile. They sell their influence. The highest bidder, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Just give me enough money and I'll be happy to do it. And of course, Mr. Trump grifted the entire time he was in office the last time. And this time, he doesn't even have to worry about how his base perceives him and how his base sees him. No, now he doesn't need their vote any longer. And therefore, he can openly grift. He can be openly corrupt and vile to the core. And all is well with the world. He doesn't need you anymore. He doesn't need your vote. And folks, I'm telling you, we're in for a bumpy ride. We are in for a bumpy ride. The one thing I'm glad for today, I'm mad as a hornet. I am mad as a hornet. I'll tell you, I still, folks, I have so many people in my family, people that I knew, that I thought I knew for decades, who have wound up becoming Trump worshipers, and it just maddens me. It sickens me. I cannot, for the life of me, understand how anyone could fall for this clown. I will never understand how anyone could fall for this con man. You know, it's one thing when the con is well packaged and when the corruption is um, kept very much secret, you know. But this guy, everything he does is right out in the open. And he said, I can shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and I won't lose a single vote. That shows you how much he took your vote for granted. That shows you how much he knew he had his base in his back pocket. How did he know? Because he's so lovable and wonderful that these people were just going, no, 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 no. He knew that he was manipulating these people. He knew he had them in his back pocket because he always said the right things. He always was promising them those things they wanted to hear. And he knew, I've got these people right in my back pocket. They're not going anywhere. I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and they'd still vote for me. And with that mentality, he entered the White House and said, I can have government officials, I can have oligarchs from around the world spending exorbitant amounts of money in my hotels and at my um, various um, golf resorts and what have you. And this is how they can launder their bribes. This is how they can launder money to me in order to express interest in my using my influence and my power on their behalf. And he did this openly. If a Democrat, any Democrat, ever pulled a stunt like this, the Republicans forget about impeaching. The Republicans would have been assembling gallows and calling for his or her hanging. But the double standard, you know, uh, the Republican Party has been and continues to be the epitome of hypocrisy. We see that hypocrisy as they scream and cry about one Democrat who heckles Trump during his State of the Union speech and how they immediately act to eject that man from the floor uh, of the assembly, you know, because he's being disruptive. And yet, as President Joe Biden made his 2023 State of the Union address, the Republicans did to him exactly the same thing. They booed, they hissed, they made all kinds of noise. And Marjorie Taylor Greene openly and verbally and loudly heckled him, calling him a liar. And yet you did not see the Republicans acting to censor Marjorie Taylor Greene, nor did you see the leadership of the House seeking to eject her from the floor of the assembly. No, it was not necessary because in 2023 we had a man for president and not a mouse. We had someone who was able to face his audience, who was able to handle the heckling, who was able to handle the booing and the hissing and simply move on with his speech. That was a real man. That was real strength. That is what a president ought to look like. Oh, folks, it is about 6 or 7 minutes away from 6:30, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this podcast. Boy, I'm not able to talk today. I'm going to bring it to a close. Yes, I must confess, I'm telling you, it is so hard for me these days to digest how anybody could support this regime. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. But I want to end this podcast on the same note that I'm trying to end my podcasts on. And that is, I want to remind God's people today that no matter how dark the skies may grow, no matter how high the waves may roll, no matter how stormy the seas, Jesus Christ is in our vessel. Hallelujah. And he is able to speak peace in the midst of the storm. Praise the name of the Lord. Do not be dismayed. Do not be discouraged. Do not be fearful, but rather believe God, trust God, walk in God's economy, and he has promised that he will in fact protect us, he will defend us, and he will provide for us. But my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches. Hallelujah. Thank God. God does not have to rely upon the world's riches to meet our needs. He has storehouses in heaven that contain more than we could ever begin to need. And that is where our God draws his resources. He will supply all our needs. How? According to what? His riches in glory by Christ Jesus. Hallelujah. So, whatever you may need today, whatever you may have need of, understand that God has in his storehouse the resources to meet your need. Okay, don't worry about whether or not you can see where the need being met will come from. That is a weakness, I must confess, that I all too often have. I've many times in my life, I've said, Lord, I think you could meet this need by doing this, or I think you can meet this need by speaking to this person or that person. I've got it all figured out for God. I've got it all figured out. Lord, I know the resources that you have available to you. This person is one of your resources, and you can tap them and speak to them to help us in this time of trouble, in this time of struggle. And yet, God has turned around so many times in my life, and he has met the need, but he has done so in a way that I could not even have imagined. I remember a few years ago, I was going through a certain circumstance. I won't go into great detail about it, but I was going through a certain circumstance, and it was troubling me. It was causing me a lot of consternation. And I said, Lord, I cannot see any way on earth that you could possibly handle this situation for me. The only way I could see is this. And I told the Lord the one way that I could see he could fix this problem and help me in this situation. And I prayed and I said, but Lord, you know more than I do. So however you can do it, do it. But, thank God I'm as brilliant as God is, because I've already got it figured out. And the only way I can see clear that you could ever do this is thus and so. Well, I want to tell you something. God came through. The Lord came through. Holy mackerel, did he come through. And he took care of the situation. And he did so in a way that was mind-bogglingly shocking. I never in a million years could see the way that the Lord came through. I didn't even see it as a possibility. It wasn't even on the map for me. And yet, that is how God came through. He did something that was so shocking and so surprising and so wonderful. And it accomplished exactly the end that I was needing. It literally accomplished exactly the end that I was needing. And I'm here to tell you today, if God can do it for me, he can do it for you. But my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory. I pray today that God would give us all victory in our hearts and our minds, that the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, would overwhelm us today. But more than this, I pray that God would restore unto us the joy of our salvation, for the joy of the Lord is our strength. And if we are going to survive and come out on the other side of this time of trial victorious and conquerors, then we are going to need the joy of the Lord. That's my prayer for you today. Folks, I appreciate your being with us today. Until we see you again, as always, God bless you in Jesus' name.
A voice of reason in turbulent times with Pastor Charles Burnett-Morrow, speaking truth at a time when truth is in short supply.
Welcome to Forward Christian Life Center, where every believer finds a home. Nestled in inclusivity, our spirit-filled, Christ-centered church warmly embraces all, celebrating diversity with open hearts. With empathy and compassion at our core, we foster growth and nurture community connections, affirming and supporting LGBT believers. Join us in exalting Christ, sharing charity, and embracing a journey of faith and acceptance. Become part of a community where love knows no bounds and every story is cherished. Discover more about our vibrant community at forwardclc.com.
Need your help. By liking and sharing our videos and posts, you can help us get our message out to a far wider audience. So please, if you appreciate our message and are willing to help us be far more effective in reaching a wider audience, like and share our videos and posts.